January 17, 1994, 4:31 in the morning. A 6.7 magnitude earthquake hits Northridge, California. The city needs hospitals. 8 of them are gone. Not collapsed, evacuated, structurally compromised. Non-structural systems failed, equipment destroyed, power cut. 8 of 91 acute care hospitals in Los Angeles County had to evacuate patients. People in intensive care units, people mid-surgery, patients on ventilators being carried down stairwells at 4 a.m. while the ground was still moving. The city needed hospitals the most at the exact moment it had the fewest. Exactly 1 year later, January 17, 1995, Kobe, Japan, magnitude 7.2, 150,000 buildings collapsed or were irreparably damaged, more than 6,000 people killed, 300,000 homeless, 2 earthquakes, 1 year apart. Same calendar date, both hospital systems failed exactly when they were needed most. The question that engineers in both countries asked afterward was not how to make hospitals stronger, it was how to make them smarter. Most earthquake-resistant buildings are designed to survive. The structure stands, the walls don't collapse, the engineers declare success. But a hospital is not a building. A hospital is a machine, and a machine that survives structurally but cannot function is useless. An MRI scanner tipped on its side, an operating table shifted 30 centimeters, surgical instruments scattered across a floor, 4 lines ripped from walls, oxygen systems disconnected, backup generators that start but cannot distribute power because the conduits cracked. The building is standing, the hospital is dead. This is what engineers call non-structural failure. The structure holds, but everything inside it that makes it a hospital is destroyed by the shaking. And this is where most earthquake engineering stops thinking. The 1971 San Fernando earthquake caused the structural collapse of 2 major hospitals in the San Fernando Valley. Most notably the Veterans Administration Hospital, where more than 40 people died, and Olive View Medical Center, which had to be demolished entirely. Congress passed the Alfred E. Alquist Hospital Seismic Safety Act of 1973, requiring new hospitals to remain functional after disasters. 20 years later, Northridge happened. The new hospitals didn't collapse. They still failed because the law mandated structural survival, not functional survival. The pipes cracked, the ceilings fell, the equipment slid, the power failed, the buildings were standing. The hospitals were not operational, so engineers went back further. Not to the walls, not to the foundations, to the ground itself. The solution they developed is called base isolation. Underneath a base-isolated hospital, between the foundation and the ground, engineers install a layer of bearings. Each bearing is a sandwich of steel plates and rubber layers, sometimes with a central lead core. Together they form a system that can move horizontally up to 1 meter in any direction while still supporting the full weight of the building above. When an earthquake hits, the ground moves. The bearings absorb that movement. The building above barely shifts. Seismic isolation doesn't just keep the structure standing. It keeps the equipment level, the pipes connected, the power running. Not just structural survival, functional survival. An earthquake hits a base-isolated hospital. The ground moves 1 meter. The building moves 10 centimeters. The MRI scanner stays on its platform. The operating table stays level. The surgeon keeps operating. This is not theoretical. In the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake, seismically isolated buildings in devastated areas suffered no damage. Regular buildings around them were destroyed. The isolated structures functioned. Hospitals with base isolation kept operating as patient numbers surged from the disaster outside. But here is the engineering decision that still keeps structural engineers awake at night. Base isolation costs between 5 and 15% more than conventional construction. For a large hospital, that's tens of millions of dollars. And the argument that gets made in boardrooms and government offices across America is this: the probability of a major earthquake during the lifespan of this building is low, the cost is certain, the benefit is uncertain, so the cheaper hospital gets built. California has mandated seismic upgrading for hospital facilities. By 2030, all hospital structures in the state are expected to be seismically resistant. But seismically resistant is not the same as seismically isolated. Resistant means it won't collapse. Isolated means it keeps working. The gap between those two standards is the gap between a building that survives and a hospital that functions. And there's a second problem that almost nobody discusses: redundancy. A hospital that survives an earthquake is still useless if the road to it is destroyed. Still useless if the power grid is down and the backup generators run out of fuel on day 3. Still useless if the water supply is contaminated. Still useless if the staff cannot reach it because their own neighborhoods are destroyed. The most advanced hospitals in Japan are designed with all of this in mind. Independent water supply, fuel storage for weeks, not days, communication systems that don't depend on external infrastructure, helipads, emergency supply depots built into the structure. The hospital designed not just to survive the earthquake, but to function as the command center of the disaster response while the rest of the city is destroyed around it. Japan has built this. Since the 2011 earthquake, seismic isolation is now proposed as standard for every major hospital project in the country. The United States has not caught up. There are hospitals in Los Angeles, one of the most seismically active cities on Earth, that were built before 1973, before the law, before Northridge, before engineers understood what non-structural failure meant. They are still treating patients today. They are not base isolated. They are required to be retrofitted by 2030. Many face serious financial barriers to meeting that deadline. The next major earthquake will come to California. The probability is not debated. The timing is unknown. When it arrives, the hospitals that survive structurally but fail functionally will be evacuating patients at 4 a.m. exactly as they did in 1994. And the hospitals that keep operating, the ones with isolation bearings, will be doing something that looks, from the outside, like nothing special. The building just keeps standing. The surgeons just keep operating. The monitors just keep reading. That's the point. The greatest engineering achievement is the disaster you didn't notice.